In today's video, my journey through the main questline featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind continues. Last time, it had just begun with my character being brought over to the province of Morrowind. I got to customize my character, pick my race, class, and star sign. I was introduced to the basic controls of the game and then sent on my way. My first task was to meet with a man named Caius Cosades in the town of Balmora. After finding him, he made me a novice in the blades and sent me on my way to embark on my first quest with him. I retrieved a Dwemer puzzle box at some dwarven ruin in exchange for information on the 6th house and Dagoth from the Fighters Guild. Afterwards, Caius sent me out again for a second task. This one was to receive information on the Nerevarine and the Nerevarine cult from the Mages Guild. In exchange, I needed to retrieve the skull of Lavul Indrano from an ancestral tomb. Upon reporting all of this back to Caius, he promoted me to Apprentice of the Blades, and this is where the story continues. Heeding Caius' advice, I decided it was best to go and gain a few overall levels before continuing onwards. My first idea was to go to the caves and dungeons I had previously explored and clear those out, so I traveled back to Sedanin and made my way for Adamasardis. It turns out that, other than a few pieces of treasure and extra petty loot, there weren't any more bandits or big game for me to defeat in here. Leaving slightly disappointed, I retraced my steps to Balmora and came across a few lighter enemies on the road. They helped me to increase some of my skills, which ultimately led me to achieving level 2. Pretty soon, the game prompted me to rest. I was curious if it would be like Oblivion and I would need to find a bed to actually activate the level up process. To my delight, simply resting was sufficient enough, and I got to pick 3 buffs to add to any of the attributes. A few of them had bonuses attached, which made them pretty enticing to select. In the end, I picked Willpower, which received a +3 bonus, as it also increases overall fatigue and my resistance to magic. Then I selected Strength, which gave me a +5 bonus as to help out with health, carrying capacity, fatigue, and my damage dealt with spears. Then finally, I just couldn't handle my character being this slow, so I selected Speed, which received a +5 bonus as it affects my overall movement speed. Moving along the road, I came across the second cavern of Alamusa. In here, the bandit from before was still waiting for me, which I thought was actually pretty hilarious. I defeated her and went a little bit further in to face one more bandit. He was seemingly a mage, as he did cast a couple of spells, but it didn't seem like any of them were destruction magic. I defeated Godrod pretty easily, but was briefly worried that he might have not been a hostile NPC. There wasn't much more to Alamusa besides some loot. Interestingly though, I did pick up a silver bowl belonging to someone named Belluel and got a quest for it, so I'm excited to see where that goes one day. Leaving the cave, I continued some more along the road and crossed by the third cave, Adanumaran. Similar to the previous cavern, the bandit I had once aggroed long ago was waiting for me by the door and began attacking. I defeated her and moved on to uncharted territory within the dungeon. There were 2 Nyx hounds which succumbed easily to fire magic. As a side note, they're not challenging enemies, but the way they move and their overall size really unsettles me for some reason. The rest of Adanumaran had a few bandits to face. I tried my best to use different schools of magic while fighting them. I switched over to my spear quite a few times to get some hits in and some experience. I even let myself take some heavy damage on purpose so as to increase my light armor skill. Once everything in here was defeated, I tried to rest but was interrupted by a Dark Brotherhood assassin. Normally this would be devastating, but for my own ambitions right now it was perfect timing. I did defeat the assassin, but needed the help from some scrolls to do it, as I was out of magicka and the spear just wasn't cutting it. Exiting the caverns, I didn't need too much more experience before ascending to level 3. I went around to the nooks and crannies of nearby locations and fought against mudcrabs, rats, and scribs. The final touch, which is perhaps controversial, involved me spamming the spells of Detect Creature and Shield so as to level up my Mysticism and Alteration spells. These are my major skills, so they have every right to be leveled up, but without a plan as to how to use them, and for the sake of keeping my offensive and defensive skills balanced too, I could understand why there might be some pushback. Eventually, whilst fighting a mudcrab, I hit the level 3 mark and put my extra attribute points into Intelligence, Willpower, and Endurance. With that, I was ready to continue onwards with the main questline. Traveling back to Balmora via Siltstrider and reconnecting with Caius,
I see I stand in good company. What can I do for you?
I asked him for further orders. Caius responded by saying he wants me to go to the city of Vivec and acquire further information on the Nerevarine and the 6th house. He tells me to seek out 3 different informants: Adoranir, a Khajiit in the Thieves Guild, Hulia, an Argonian in the Morag Tong, and then Meiramilo, a Dunmer priestess of the temple. He gives me 200 gold in case I'll be needing to spend some money, and I ask him further about each informant. He gives me specific instructions on where each one might be found throughout the city. I also decide to ask Caius about the Morag Tong and the Thieves Guild. The former is a government-sanctioned faction which deals with executions and assassinations. He specifically states that they're nothing like the Dark Brotherhood. The latter is an organization of criminals who deal with illegal trading. The Kimona Tong, however, an established syndicate of crime lords, is actively beating down on and undermining the Thieves Guild so as to not have any competition. With all of this in mind, I left Caius's house, sold all of my recently acquired loot at the trade house, and then hopped on a silt strider to Vivec. I debated walking over, but was happy I didn't when I saw just how far the city was from Sedanin. I remembered noting how big the building looked, thinking this was the whole city, and how it was an interesting pathway to actually get inside of it. I knew from my journal and Caius's directions that my current location, the 4 1/4 Lower Wasteworks, was where I could find the informant Hulia. I approached a stranger inside and asked them about the Argonian. He said that I could likely find him at the Black Shock Corner Club or at Joshaba's books, both which are on the same level. This is where I realized I really had to get better at following directions and being perceptive, as I searched and searched all around for these spots, but for the life of me I couldn't find them. I found myself in the underworks thinking this was where I needed to be. I ascended all the way back up and scouted the most basic locations, yet still couldn't find the desired areas. Thinking I was in the wrong building and wondering if there was more to Vivec, I exited the 4 1/4 only to have my mind blown. Vivec was huge, absolutely massive. It was multiple gigantic pyramids, all built the same, separated by water canals and connected by bridges. While it truly was a sight to see, I was also thinking how difficult it was going to be to find 3 NPCs, all of which were in different sectors. I roamed around for quite a bit attempting to find Hulia. I'll skip through most of this part as it was me wandering aimlessly around Vivec, realizing that the first building was the correct one. I eventually found my way back and looked at the map to see where the Black Shock Corner Club was. Soon thereafter, I located it and managed to find Hulia.
What do you want?
Speaking with him, he welcomed me and knew that I was sent by Caius. He said that he wished to go to his friend's bookstore, but the Dunmers surrounding him were causing trouble. He mentioned that the sight of a free Argonian offends them and that their racism is going to likely lead towards violence against him. He asks me to either speak with them to calm them down or to prepare myself for a fight. Once we make it to the bookstore, he'll tell me anything I want to know. Speaking with the Dunmer, they definitely show their hatred and prejudices against his race and even go as far as to mock me for being his acquaintance. Unfortunately, as a bit of a vibe killer, I left the corner club and the city so I could rest on Crown land in order to replenish my bars. I only remembered after doing so that the corner club offers beds to sleep in, so I wasted a bit of my time here, but rest assured I'll be remembering this for the next occasion. Returning back to Hulia, he asks if we're ready to travel together to the bookstore. I tell him yes, and as soon as I do, all 3 Dunmer thugs aggro onto us. 2 of them are on me and the third one solos with Hulia. I've since learned too that my fire spells do practically nothing against the Dark Elves, as they have resistance to fire magic, so that was a hard learnt lesson as well. Eventually, the fight came down to the wire, but all of the troublemakers were defeated and Hulia and I were able to make our way over to Joshaba's bookstore. Once we were safe and sound, he spoke with me once more and thanked me for my help. He said that he would tell me all about the Nerevarine cult and any info he had about the 6th house. He details that the Ashlanders used to be very similar to that of the settled Dunmer cult of Resdane, but after the First Council and the formation of the Great Houses, they've been forced into the most hostile and unforgiving lands of the province. They await the day that Nerevar will return and restore their traditions and rights. There's a lot of turmoil and tension between Ashlanders, the Great Houses, and the Outlanders. They dislike the worship of the Tribunal and also dislike the way the Imperial Legion treats them. I asked more about the persecution of the Nerevarine, to which I received an answer similar to one that I've heard before. The temple arrests and executes anyone who outright shows their heresy of believing in such a prophecy. I did learn some new information, however, by asking about the so-called false incarnate. Over the years, many people have wrongly claimed to be the Nerevarine. The temple considers these false identities to only work against the legitimacy of the cult's claims. Others, however, believe that this strengthens their claim, as the power and hold of such a being is unprecedented. Having gathered the information that I needed, I left the foreign quarters and wandered until I reached the St. Olms district. This was the area in which I was to find the Khajiit Ald'ruhn. Asking around though, no one in St. Olms could tell me where she was. I did, however, have a strange incident occur. I went up to a man named Duvanius Blatorius. I was about to ask him about the Khajiit when he beat me to the punch. He said that he too was looking for Ald'ruhn. He asked me where I could find her, but I answered truthfully in that I wasn't sure. Leaving the conversation, I decided to try down in the canal works to see if she'd be in here. I ended up speaking with a woman named Savisa Terran, and she actually had new information for me. Apparently, the man I had just spoken with, Duvanius, is a census and excise agent. His reasoning for wanting to locate Ald'ruhn is likely not a good one, so she went into hiding. Apparently, she could be found in the underworks below St. Olms. Descending down a trapdoor, I laid eyes on a Khajiit and approached her. She knew I was sent by Caius and said that at this moment, she can't discuss the Nerevarine or the Sixth House cult because of the census and excise agent. She hints that he's looking for her because she's likely dealt in the trade of outlawed goods. Taking the game's hint on what needs to happen, I ascended all the way back up to the wasteworks and spoke with Duvanius. He asks me yet again if I've seen Ald'ruhn, and I'm faced with the options of telling the truth or lying. I lie and say she took a gondola to the mainland. He replies by saying he was heading back there anyways and thanks me for my time. I do wonder what would have happened if I had sold her out, but figured that there's no need to dwell on it. Heading back down to the underworks, I meet again with Ald'ruhn, and she thanks me for getting rid of Duvanius. She says that I can ask her any questions I'd like on the Sixth House cult and the Nerevarine. For the former, she says that recently, some smugglers have dropped their old clients and work to pursue a new employer, the Sixth House. They pay extremely well, yet Ald'ruhn doesn't know what it is they're smuggling. She details this to be odd, as normally they have loose lips and are very boastful. It's not common for them to be hush-hush about their product. I asked further about smuggling, and she tells me that there are specific items that the Empire has banned trade of, like Dwemer artifacts, ebony, moon sugar, etc. As for the Nerevarine, she only tells me that she doesn't believe in the cult and its prophecies, so she isn't much help there. Leaving this conversation, I only needed to seek out one last informant. I got pretty lucky in that upon exiting the St. Olms Wasteworks, I laid eyes on what I could only presume was the Temple District. Making my way over there, I noticed that what I thought was just another structure attached to the temple was actually a big rock floating in the sky. It looks as though it's been dug into and can be entered inside of. I moved along with my task at hand and spoke with an NPC named Danso Andulas. I asked where to find Mera Milo, and they responded by saying she could be found in the Library of Vivek at the Hall of Wisdom section. Referencing the local map, I located the Hall of Wisdom entrance and went inside. Whilst here, I asked another NPC where to find Mera, and they responded by saying I should try her private quarters first. One issue that I haven't really covered with this game is the fact that some NPCs outright block pathways. If they're too narrow, I find it's practically impossible to get past them and have to wait a minute or so for them to move. This happened to me on several occasions, and while it's not the biggest deal in the world, it certainly is frustrating. Going up the stairs, I found Mera's office, which happened to be locked. Assuming then she was in the library, I made my way over, and to my delight, there she was. I began speaking with her, and she said that she couldn't speak here and asked me to follow her to the back of the library. Putting a pause on the conversation, I let her move to a secure spot and then resumed our talk. I asked about the Nerevarine cult, and she confirmed my suspicions that they're indeed antagonists with the temple religion and the tribunal, claiming the three to be false gods. She goes into detail on how there's a group called the Dissident Priests who actively refute the temple's claims. They even go as far as to say that their godly powers are sorcery and not divine, similar to that of Dagoth Urs. They have a book written about their beliefs called The Progress of Truths. The temple has outlawed the sale and ownership of this book as its contents are believed to be heresy. She recommends though that I pick one up and present it to Caius. The book is rare and can only be found at select shops, although which ones are unknown. The library does have a copy, but it's under a watchful eye from the Ordinators. Mayra wraps up the conversation by saying that she's read the book and the contents disturb her. She has friends who have gone into hiding because of the knowledge they now possess. She fears she's next to garner attention and says that if something were to go wrong, she'll send a message under the agreed code word Amaya to Caius. At this point, I assume that part of the reason Joshaba's bookstore was so relevant during Hulia's portion was to direct the player over there for the book. Traveling between the buildings can take quite some time, so I thought I came up with a genius idea to use the scrolls I found on Tariel's body. They temporarily boost my acrobatics skill by 1000. Thinking I would leap a good distance, I tried it and ended up leaping a great distance. Reverting to my last save, I decided to just run over to the Foreign Quarter District. Making my way into the store, I glossed over Joshaba's wares and came across a copy of Progressive Truths. I purchased it and glanced at the first little bit. The book had some pretty spicy takes, as it deemed the Tribunal get their powers from Red Mountain and that they relied on unholy Dwemer-made tools instead of divinity to obtain them, essentially calling them very powerful mages. It also says that their actions at Red Mountain and their motives behind them are at best unclear, claiming to have dark and selfish intent there. I put the book away and decided to disembark from the city of Vivec and head back to Balmora. Arriving, I spoke with Caius and told/handed him all of the new information I had just been given. He said he needed time to think it all over, and he then promoted me to Journeyman of the Blades. He handed me gold and said that I should keep myself busy in the meantime before he's ready to give me a new set of orders. With that, thus ends the quest, Vivec Informants. After reading some suggestions and using some much needed logic, I decided it was best to diversify my destruction magic arsenal. Many enemies are resistant to fire magic in some capacity, and some have incredible weaknesses to the other elements. So, I took a Silt Strider back to Sedanin and visited Aril at his trade house. He had a Spark spell and a Frostbite spell for sale. Buying both of them, I paid a quick visit to the Blades trainer in the area above the shop to see what she could offer me. Her prices were cheap, but they were skills in which I wasn't looking to increase right now. I left the establishment, hitched a ride back to Balmora, and spoke with Caius about my next set of orders. Caius said that we need to learn information from an Ashlander about the Nerevarine cult. He told me to go to the town of Ald'ruhn and seek out a man named Hassar Saint Zubani. He's a former Ashlander who left the Wastes to become a wealthy trader. Caius hands me 100 gold and says that Ashlanders appreciate gifts, as it's more likely to make Hassar open up about the information in which I need. Inquiring further, he tells me how to reach Ald'ruhn by foot and says that Silt Strider travel would be the easiest. He tells me multiple places in which I could find Hassar, citing Aldskar Inn as the best spot. As for the Ashlanders, he says that they get a bad rep and that they're tough people for living the way that they do. Before leaving, I wanted to rest in Caius's bed to replenish my bars. Upon doing so, I had back-to-back dreams, both equally as disturbing as the one I had some time ago. Both dreams involved the same tall figure with the golden mask. The first one, he spoke to me saying that he delivered me from the hands of my enemies. It seemed as though I had died and was having an out-of-body experience. I tried to reach out to my body, but that caused it to come back to life and rise up, ending the dream. In the next one, the tall figure was talking with me and tried to physically reach out, almost as if he was casting a spell on me. I panicked but couldn't move. I wasn't able to recall how the dream ended. Finally, on my third try, I was able to get some rest and then depart for my quest. One of the best ways to learn and to get to know the environment is to actually experience it. I took the easy route to Vivec and feel that I likely missed out on some nice scenery and unique occurrences. This time, to get to Ald'ruhn, I decided to take the road and walk there. As per Caius's directions, I took the road leading north out of town and followed the signs leading towards Caldera. From my time experimenting around prior, I remembered that there was a dead dark elf with someone else's skooma pipe and a note on them. I left it alone though, as I didn't want to trigger or begin any side quests. Caldera wasn't far from Balmora, and along the way I mostly encountered elites and rats in terms of enemies. I had also learned that the different directional keys dictate the type of swing you do, and those all have their own unique damage counters. I thought this was a really cool feature, and the more I play this game, the more I realized just how many of these neat little features were missed opportunities to add to Oblivion and Skyrim. I wandered through Caldera but didn't spend much time in there. I still had a long journey ahead of me and wanted to experience the road ahead. During this stretch of the road, I actually encountered quite a lot of friendly NPCs who seemingly had side quests to hand out. Flormar Winesaught, a practically naked Nord, asked me to help him find a witch who robbed him. Fortunately, this didn't trigger the quest and I was able to just move on. Shortly thereafter, I encountered an orc named Bugrol Grobagol, and he cryptically asked me for help in exchange for a present. This unfortunately did trigger the quest, but I just moved along. I prefer to save every little detail for the side quests video I'm going to make eventually, so that's why I'm being very particular right now. Continuing along the road, I found a field of rats and decided to practice my new destruction magic. As a side note, I find the casting noise for Spark to be really satisfying for some reason. Soon, I hit a road sign that split the pathway and showed there's a back road and a main road for getting to Ald'ruhn. I chose the main path and shortly came upon an NPC pacing back and forth very quickly. His speed was almost unnerving. Speaking with him, all he asked was if I wanted to make a deal. I quickly left him alone and continued on my path. Eventually, I found yet another friendly NPC, this time an Argonian named Rasha. All he asked me was if I could help him with some pressing business. I didn't respond and kept walking. It was here I thought to myself, there's a lot of appeal to going off the road and exploring the uncharted wildlands in between the settlements, but the road is where you get the raw and true NPC experience that's hard to find in the wild. I encountered my first cliff racer whilst on the road and managed to cheese my way to victory as it got stuck in a group of trees. Eventually, I was nearing Ald'ruhn when I came across another fork in the road. I took the path leading towards town when I saw yet another naked Nord on the other pathway. His name was Hissin Deepraid and he was quite hostile towards me, but was frozen in place due to some sort of enchantment. This triggered another side quest, so I had to move on. It seems like there's no shortage of friendly NPCs on the road. At some point, I must have taken a wrong turn or perhaps didn't go as far as Caius said I needed to because the road started going north of Ald'ruhn. I decided to get off the path and shoot straight for town. I came across a cavern guarded by nuisance animals that was simply called Milk, and got a pretty good kick out of that. I didn't go in it though, as I'll likely save it for leveling purposes. I battled a few more cliff racers and Qualma foragers before eventually making it to the limits of Ald'ruhn. Here, I attempted to get information on where specifically Hasor could be, but no one had it as a dialogue option. Unfortunately, I spoke to a Ridarain guard and their opening dialogue had to deal with the Dark Brotherhood, and they told me to seek out Apelles Madius, involuntarily furthering this questline. Ignoring it though, I wandered around the city searching for Aldskar Inn. It took me longer than expected, but had finally found it and entered inside. I wandered to the top floor and spoke with Sadrin Volos. I asked him about Hasor and he said that he could be found either downstairs, reading, or in the back room below the bar. I looked extensively in the lower level but didn't see the Ashlander anywhere. I went back to the upper level, located the stairs behind the bar, and lo and behold, there was Hasor Zainsubani. Speaking with him, he introduced himself and rather politely told me to hurry up with my business. I told him I wanted to learn more about Ashlanders and was prompted to ask about their gift-giving customs, the Nerevarine cult, or everything in general. Knowing that I had to do things a certain way, I simply asked about their gift-giving customs. He found my request interesting and informed me that thoughtful gifts go a long way for Ashlanders. A gift that is courteous, considerate, and relevant to the receiver will be highly regarded. Asking further about what he thinks is a thoughtful gift, he said that he would love a book on poetry, as only a real friend would know that he enjoys it. I left the conversation and remembered seeing a bookstore whilst casing around for the inn. Heading over there, I spoke with the merchant, Codus Colonis, and asked him about Hasor. He gave me the tip that Hasor would probably like the books, Words of the Wind, Ashland Hymns, or the 5 Stars. I purchased Ashland hymns from Codis and returned back to the Ald'ruhn.
I'm listening.
What do you want?
Handing the book over to Hasor, he was ecstatic about my attention to detail and said that he would honor my courtesy by answering any questions I had. He gave me a summarized note of everything he knew for Caius's reading. Asking about the Nerevarine cult, I learned information that Nerevar destroyed the Dwemer race and was the one to banish Dagoth-Ur and the 6th house under Red Mountain. He mentions that the so-called Urshilaku tribe is the most prominent one to be a part of the Nerevarine cult. He goes on to say that the Urshilaku cult is located in the northwest region of Vardenfell. Their chief is Ashkan Solmatul, and they're a nomadic people but stick close to the Sea of Ghosts. Hasor also says that it is common for the Ashlanders to issue challenges of combat to one another as well as outsiders. They're not very keen on Outlanders, as some tribes may be hostile towards them and others may be welcoming. Exiting the conversation, I pulled out the note that he had handed to me and read it for more details. One important detail that Hasor never mentioned is that among the Urshilaku tribe, there's an oracle seer named Nabani Mesa. She holds a lot of wisdom and is a counselor for the cult and tribe. Exiting the Ald'ruhn, I hopped on the Siltstrider for a ride back to Balmora. Entering inside of Caius's house, I presented him with the newly learned information, and he responded in quite a shocking way. He said that he's promoting me further and that I should keep the notes on me, as I'm going to go to the Urshilaku tribe to speak with Solmatul and Nabani Mesa. More importantly though, he said that it's time to really tell me what's going on here. Apparently, the Emperor and his advisors believe that I have the appearance of meeting the conditions for the Nerevarine prophecies. Supposedly, I could be the one to become the so-called Nerevarine. Caius then hands me a copy of the decoded package that I once gave to him long ago, saying that it should explain everything. He then goes on to ask me if I'm really the one to live up to the standards and expectations of such a cultural fit. At first, he thought it was all for show, but now he isn't sure what to make of it. This is why I'm being sent to the Urshilaku tribe, as they can be the ones to determine if I truly meet the qualifications for the Nerevarine prophecies. Caius then gives me 200 gold and says that I should pick up essential supplies at Fort Moonmoth. He tells me Samudius Vunus and Crulius Protanian have set aside potions and scrolls for me, courtesy of the Emperor. Blight is apparently very bad up north, and the Divine Intervention Scroll can be used to send me back to safety if I get in over my head. As for the Urshilaku camp, Caius gives me the best directions to get there safely. Exiting the conversation, thus ends the quest, Zain Subani Informant. Leaving Caius's home, I shot straight for Fort Moonmoth, which is located southeast of town. Arriving, I entered inside of the fort's interior and looked around for Caius's contacts. Finding Crulius first,
Greetings.
I asked him about the essential supplies and he handed me multiple useful scrolls: Divine Intervention, the Second Barrier, Warrior's Blessing, and Purity of Body. I then went out and found Samudius and asked him for the essential supplies as well. He handed me potions of Cure Common Disease, Cure Blight Disease, Fortify Health, Fortify Strength, and Fortify Speed. Samudius then tells me that I should stock up on more potions, as diseases are running rampant up north and there aren't many Imperial Cult cure altars up in those parts of Vardenfell. Before buying more, I noticed that he offers the services of creating spells. I fiddled around with the sliders and ended up making more destruction magic. I made more powerful versions of the ranged spells for each of the elements. And then I made my most powerful touch spell yet for fire magic. After that, I went ahead to buy more potions and then returned back to Balmora. Taking the Siltstrider to Ald'ruhn, I followed Caius' advice and took the next Siltstrider to Margon. Here, I found the Margon outpost and searched for his contact, Nuleno Tedas. I asked her about the Urshilaku camp and she gave me very specific instructions on how to find it. I began with leaving town in search of the Foyada Banadad, the deep ravine north of town. I'm fairly certain though I took the wrong path and ended up following a road that ran parallel to it for quite some time. The weather was horrible as the sand/dust storm kicked up and made visibility very poor. To be honest, I kinda loved it though, as it added an extra element to my adventure. I got attacked by a Gwar and had the chance to try out my new spells. I have no clue how much health it had to begin with, but my best spell did kill it with one cast, so I felt pretty good about that. Eventually, the road I was on presented the option of splitting off and going towards what I assumed was the actual ravine. I took it and began walking along the Foyada Banadad. I replenished my bars and the dust storm subsided, which was nice on my eyes and ears. I came across a door to a dungeon called Shishi, but left it alone for the time being. Along the way, I encountered a lot of cliff racers. They didn't hit very hard and my spells were able to kill them off in about 3 or so casts. The pathway along the ravine was long but very uneventful. I did end up passing underneath what I assumed to be dwarven ruins, which I thought was pretty neat. Eventually, I came to what I believed to be the end of the ravine and spotted what I thought was Asurna Batashbi Shrine, which I'll call Asurna for short. Just before Asurna was another cave. This one was called Iberdad. I also decided to leave it alone. Tedas had told me to steer clear of Asurna as it was filled with Daedric enemies. What confused me, however, was that I had never come across a shipwreck. She told me that that's what I should use as a landmark to know that I was going the right way. Maybe the path I had just taken wasn't actually the right one. Regardless, I was able to see where the camp was on my map the whole time, so in the grand scheme of things, it really didn't matter. My curiosity got the better of me when it came to Asurna. I really wanted to know what the Daedric enemies she was referring to were. So I got in close and attracted the attention of 2 scamps. They instantly aggroed onto me and the fighting began. It was a pretty close one, as they had me on the ropes for quite some time. This is the fight though where I discovered just how powerful my spear was. I really only used it as a last resort, but it actually dealt a lot of damage to the scamps. Eventually, I was able to kill off both of them and move on from the spot. Admittedly, there were quite a few more enemies in between me and the Ashlander camp that needed to be taken care of, like cliff racers, Nyx hounds, and shulks. Soon enough though, I made it to the base of the camp and entered within its limits. I really didn't know what to expect out of it. I wasn't sure how they would treat my presence. It was a good sign that they didn't attack me on sight though. Speaking with some of the tribe members, they were appalled at me, citing that I should go away and cure myself. Along the way to get here, I did contract Witbane from a rat, so I'm wondering if that's what they were speaking of. At one point, I even ignorantly wandered into Sul-Matul's hut and he threatened to have me killed. Quickly leaving, none of the other tribespeople were really over the moon about me being there. I asked about gaining an audience with the chief or the oracle seer, but no one permitted me to do so. I then inquired about thoughtful gifts in which I could have given them. I got a variety of snarky answers. The leading results though were trauma root and quama eggs. I looked around the vicinity for these ingredients and unfortunately couldn't find them / didn't really know what to look for. So instead I approached the tribesman, Shaban Bale, and had to bribe him with roughly 300 gold pieces, which was incredibly steep. Only then did he take what I had to say seriously. He wonders what an outlander like myself wants with the Nerevarine prophecy. He thinks that me being the Nerevarine is unlikely, but he notes that I don't sound like a madman or a fool. He then allowed me to go and speak with Zabamund, Sul-Matul's champion, in his yurt. Inside of Zabamund's hut,
I can already tell. I'm not going to like this.
I met with him and asked him about speaking with the chief or the oracle seer. He also denied me such an audience. I then asked about the Nerevarine prophecies. He questioned why an outlander would want to know such things and asked who I was and why they should trust me. I was prompted with picking 4 dialogue options. The first one I picked had me explain my journey thus far and all of the information I had gathered. Zabamund acknowledges its importance to me, but says that it has nothing to do with his tribe, at least in the way that it's been told to him. I then circle back and challenge him to combat. He calls me a mere stripling and says that he could gain as much honor by killing a dog. Finally, I choose option number 3 of gifting him 200 gold. Of course, he then allows me to go and speak with the chief, as I had just given my proof of respect. I left Zabamund's hut and re-entered back inside of Sul-Matul's. This time, he didn't threaten me and says he's curious about the questions I have. I tell him about my potential to fulfill the Nerevarine prophecies, and he says that no outlander may join the Nerevarine cult. He does then offer to test me though through something called an initiation rite. If I were to pass it, I would then be adopted as a clan friend of the Ashlanders. This would then gain me an audience with Nabani Mesa. I asked about the initiation rite, and Sul-Matul tells me it will be a harrowing quest. He wishes me to go into the Urshilaku burial caverns in search of Sul-Senepal's Bonebiter bow. This was his father's weapon, and Sul-Matul says that his spirit still guards it, which will likely result in a battle. I ask about the caverns and the chief gives me specific instructions on how to get there. He also says I should expect resistance from the ghosts of his ancestors which still guard the cave. I leave Solmatul's hut and glance at the directions he gave me. For this one, I decided to shoot straight south-southeast as his way felt like it took more detours than it needed to. Pretty quickly, I arrived at the exterior of the caverns and defeated a Kaguti that was guarding the entrance. I made my way to the door and entered inside. The first zone, titled Urshilaku Astral Burial, contained mostly skeletons mixed with a few rats. I tried out my new destruction magic and was able to defeat the skeletons with 2 casts of my ranged attacks. This was really nice to see, except the only issue was that my magicka drained a lot faster than before. I managed to get to level 4 whilst in here and put my attribute points towards willpower, strength, and agility. I did this because they received extra buffs, whilst intelligence did not, but I'm worried that I'm falling into a trap. My spear skill benefits from these choices, but my magicka abilities don't really benefit as much. Right in front of me was the door that led to the next zone, titled Urshilaku Karma Burial. Here I battled more skeletons, which again, weren't too much of an issue. Along the walls, or on elevated platforms, there would occasionally be mummies holding weapons, armor, and scrolls. I made sure to check out as many as I could, as at the very least, they would fetch a pretty penny. Also, at the odd area, there would be a random dead adventurer with decent loot on them too. There are 2 different ways to turn while at the end of the first section for the Karma Burial. I turned left, or down in terms of the local map, and ended up at a door that led to a new zone called the Latterus Burial. I found this zone to be the most interesting. It had a small ground presence, but ascended pretty far up in terms of vertical depth. At the center of this zone was a rock column that had a pathway leading all the way up. I decided to keep climbing the rocks and follow the path. I would pass by more mummies, which unfortunately were mostly inaccessible to me. I passed by more than a few doors leading to different zones until I reached the top. The door here led to an area called Juno Burial. I didn't know for certain, but my best guess was that the less in-your-face option was likely the right one. I went through and followed the pathways in here. I fought against a few skeletons as the cave twisted and turned in different directions. Eventually, I got to a unique area that contained these fountains of glowing substances. They were surrounded by loot, and it made me wonder if I was getting set up for a big fight. I heard the same noises that were coming from the Andrano ancestral tomb, and it definitely got me thinking that there was a spirit somewhere around here. I wandered into the next room, and sure enough was aggroed onto by one. I made the mistake of not completely recharging my magic and was only able to let off 2 spells. It got the spirit down to about 2/3 of its health. I was wondering what to do here, but decided to just see about switching to my dwarven spear. I was surprised when I was able to land hits on it, as I always just assumed if it wasn't silver or enchanted, it would do nothing to the spirit. Thrusting with the spear did a good deal of damage to the ghost, and most importantly, it didn't hit me back that hard. The fight was quite lengthy, as both of us had trouble landing hits, and our health bars would go down sparingly. Eventually though, I landed the killing blow, and was able to confirm that this was the spirit of Sul Senapul. I retrieved the Bonebiter bow and in theory, could have left the burial caverns. I decided though that I wanted to make sure I grabbed everything of value before leaving, as who knows the next time I would venture back in here. So because of that, I did have an index of each zone pulled up beside me to see what could have been looted and where. Most of the really cool items were unfortunately only attainable via levitation or a very high acrobatic skill. I found this out pretty late though, as I had spent quite a long time in here looking around. I went to 2 more zones. The Kakuma burial was the first one. I had gotten complacent with my skills and had actually died quite a few times while here. There were 3 skeletons, and for the most part, the attainable loot was mediocre for my character's needs. I did retrieve a scroll of Hellfire though, which seemingly would be able to get me out of most binds. Leaving this zone, I then checked out the Fragile Burial, which was quite underwhelming. There were 3 different pathways to go, and the loot for 2 of them wasn't anything special. The third, however, was inaccessible as it was a locked door underwater. I did explore a little more in the Karma Burial zone and fought more skeletons, but it wasn't much to boast about. So it was here that I turned around and left the Urshilaku Burial Caverns to return back to the tribal area. Entering back into Solmatul's hut, he asked if I had completed the initiation rite, in which I showed him his father's bow. He was delighted to see it and named me clan friend of the Ashlanders. He told me I could keep the Bonebiter bow and that I was now able to rest in any of the Urshilaku beds. He reminded me to be respectful whilst here, and allowed me to now go and seek Nabani Mesa about the Nerevarine prophecies. Before leaving, I decided to ask him some questions. Getting his opinion on the prophecies, he said he speaks plain in that it's hard to believe I'm the Nerevarine. I'm an outlander, and one of the very promises of the Nerevarine is to drive them out from the lands. He doesn't like the idea of such a role being fulfilled by a foreigner, and says that even though I'm now a clan friend, I do well to respect the image of the Nerevarine. I quickly asked him about Red Mountain, and he informed me that the beasts and servants of Dagoth still reside there to this day. It's apparently surrounded and contained by something called the Ghost Fence. Nothing is able to come out of there, and for the most part, go in either, as rain nor sunlight ever touch inside. I left Solmatul's hut and went inside of what I thought was Mesa's. It wasn't hers, but I decided to sleep in her bed just to replenish my bars. This was when I was interrupted yet again by another Dark Brotherhood assassin. I found it quite entertaining that he entered inside of the hut with me and was just trapped in there until I went back inside. I rested in another hut, went back into Melee's yurt, killed the assassin, looted his gear, and then found the yurt belonging to the wise woman. Entering inside, I confirmed that this was Nabani Mesa's hut and began to speak with her. She said that Solmatul had informed her of my presence and that I should be tested against the Nerevarine prophecies. I inquire about them and she gives me a rather lengthy list of requirements. Before anything else, I asked her about my disturbing dreams. Finally, someone was able to give me an answer, as she said these were the doings of Dagoth. He's apparently trying to compel me and I must resist his attempts. She tells me I mustn't hear the voice of the Sharmut as it will drive me mad. I then circled back to the Nerevarine prophecies and asked her about each individual one, starting with the aspect of uncertain parents. She said that I was indeed born on a certain day to uncertain parents. However, many people are, and this doesn't prove that I'm the Nerevarine. I then ask about the moon and star. She says that the moon and star varied from legend to legend about how it was connected to Indoril Nerevar. Some say it was a ring, others say a birthmark, and few say it was his weapons and armor. Regardless, I bear no markings of it, so it doesn't help plead my case. I ask about the sleepers next, and she said that their timing mixed with my arrival could be a coincidence. I then inquired about the 7 curses of the Sharmut, but she said that she doesn't know them and that they could likely be found amongst the dissident priests of the temple. Next was the stranger, and her response came in the form of a short story. She spoke of the 7 curses, sleepers, and the moon and star among other things. Perhaps the most interesting inquiry thus far was that of the 7 visions of 7 trials of the incarnate. The first trial deals with the birth sign, and birth on a certain day to uncertain parents. The second trial possibly deals with the Nerevarine being unaffected by age or blight, or perhaps their ability to heal said disease. The third trial deals with the Shrine of Azura in the Cavern of the Incarnate. It apparently holds many secrets. The fourth trial deals with the Hortator, a war leader champion who will be selected by the Dunmer Great Houses. The fifth trial says the Nerevarine will unite the 4 Ashlander tribes. The sixth trial says that they will honor the tribe unmourned, eating their sin. Nabani says that this is either directed towards the 6th house or the Dwemer. Then, the 7th trial says that their mercy frees the cursed false gods. She says that this most definitely refers to the tribunal and calls them evil sorcerers and necromancers. Then lastly, there's one destiny which revolves around uniting the Ashlanders and the Great Houses. I asked Nabani outright if I'm the Nerevarine, and she said no. She followed up though by saying that I may become the Nerevarine. She tasked me to go to the dissident priests of the temple and seek out the lost prophecies. Once I have them, Nabani will be my guide. She hands me some books and then sends me on my way, thus ending the quest. Meet Sul Matul.